Good to be joined today by Ben Goessling from the Star Tribune. I'm Michael Rand, of course. Ben, we've been talking about this for a few days now,
Yeah.
wondering if it was going to happen. Daniel Jones on Wednesday, we have learned, you have learned, others have learned, signing with the Vikings. Sounds like it's kind of a low leverage practice squad acquisition for now. Not a lot of money changing hands, just kind of an opportunity for him to get a bit of a fresh start, but that doesn't mean we're not going to read 7 levels into it, is it? That doesn't mean we're not going to do that.
No, it doesn't. And I think there are probably some levels to read into here because they are trying to pull off a little bit of a dance at the quarterback position. And they have been trying to do this for quite a long time. So this isn't new. It's just a different step of the dance, I suppose. But they are, I think, very much planning for J.J. McCarthy to be the quarterback next year. I think if J.J. McCarthy is healthy and he continues on the trajectory that he looked like he was going to be on in training camp, I think he will be the starter in 2025. I don't think anything has changed about that plan with this move. I think it is a recognition of the fact that Sam Darnold has probably played well enough to get a bigger contract in free agency next year. And that was always a little bit of the unspoken handshake agreement with the Darnold thing is, hey, come on in. We'll help you kind of rehabilitate your career. You're going to get a chance to start. You can kind of reframe the narratives about what you've been, and then that can lead to the multi-year contract that he never got when he gets to be a free agent next year. It also means, though, that the Vikings, who are kind of built financially for a few years of low quarterback cost, a few years of a rookie quarterback or an affordable starter, are not necessarily going to be the place to spend $40 million or whatever Darnold may get per season next year. And if you think that number sounds crazy, that's 3 years after Daniel Jones got that same deal and now is no longer in New York. That is going rate money for starting quarterbacks now, if not even more than that. So I don't think the Vikings are going to be the team to spend that much on a quarterback next year. So they're probably sitting there thinking, okay, well, if Sam Darnold's not going to be here and J.J. McCarthy still will have not played a regular season snap by the time next season starts, it's good to have options. It's good to have another veteran in the building. Nick Mullins is also a free agent. I think we kind of know what Nick Mullins is. Brett Rippon is a free agent. We'll see what Brett Rippon's future looks like in the organization after all of this. But those guys are probably not long-term answers. So the Daniel Jones thing, I think, gives them a little bit of time to take a look at him, to get to know him a little bit better. Kevin O'Connell was in Washington in 2019. They were looking for a rookie quarterback the year that Jones was a 6th pick in the draft for the Giants. In fact, Dwayne Haskins went to Washington, I think 10 picks later, 9-10 picks later in that draft. So Kevin O'Connell got to know him at that point and obviously had his one playoff appearance ended by Daniel Jones a couple of years ago.
Right.
So it's an opportunity to say, can this be the next Sam Darnold? Is there an option to bring him back for next year? You know, kind of do that same thing where he's the backup possibly, or if McCarthy is either injured or not ready to take the job, you can make Jones the starter and try to work with him for a year and see what kind of value you can extract that maybe gets him his next long-term deal. I mean, O'Connell is getting a little bit of this reputation as kind of running this QB retreat or this QB oasis, if you want to think about it that way, whether it's what he did with Cousins, what he's done with Darnold this year, the way McCarthy talked after the draft about all 6 of those rookie quarterbacks wanted to be in Minnesota. There's getting to be enough of that reputation between the coaching staff and the weapons you have to work with and just the facilities that this is a good spot to be. So I think that probably plays in Jones's mind. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the week, but his agent, Brian Murphy, has done a lot of business with the Vikings over the years. So there's a relationship there, specifically probably between Rob Brzezinski and Brian Murphy with all of those contracts. But he knows this organization very well and can say, hey, this is going to be a good spot for you to go and get a chance to kind of refresh your career. So I think in a lot of ways there are layers to it because the Vikings do have to think about what next year looks like at that position. And Jones has to think about that as well. So, yeah, lots to unpack here. it's a practice squad move, but I think there's more to it than that, as they have to think about all of these issues going down the road, and he does too.
There are definitely parallels between the path Jones took and the path Darnold is on. I want to get to those in a minute, but of course, all these reasons you lay out are good ones, and I think they're the most obvious ones and the truest ones. But I also have Vikings fans in my mentions. I got Vikings fans texting me already, like, "Hey, I get all this, but how? What's the subtext? Is this procedure McCarthy had 2 weeks ago more serious? Is he not going to be ready for 2025? Is Darnold's foot injury more serious than they're letting on? Like, everybody's paranoid. Just when they add a practice squad quarterback."
Oh, Vikings fans, you're one of a kind. I mean,
Yes.
I've seen the same things. No, I the McCarthy thing, no. I don't think there's anything more serious going on there, and that really is probably the thing to think about the most long term.
Yes.
Darnold has taken a few hits over the last week. I'm sure he's not 100%, but I don't think that he is at any risk of not playing. I don't think that's really the issue here. I think this is very much about looking forward and saying, when the inflection point that they're going to be at is fairly obvious now, which I think it is, in terms of what you're going to have in March, where Darnold's going to go out and probably get some suitors on the quarterback market, possibly, San Francisco or Los Angeles. I mean, those teams could fairly easily project how Sam Darnold would fit in their offense. In the 49ers case, he was there. In the Rams case, it's like he's played in a very, very, very similar system to that. I even wonder about the Dolphins a little bit, if Tua, depending on his long-term health, if that's not a fit. I think any of those could be places where he would land, which is to say that the affordability of bringing him back for 2025, I just don't see it. And I don't think he would have a lot of interest in it, knowing how the Vikings feel about McCarthy and what they see in the long-term picture for him. So if you are talking about that, it makes sense to say, if there's an option in front of us now that gives us a head start on this, I mean, almost like you think about, when a team fires a coach in the middle of the season, there's always kind of this discussion of, well, you get a head start with the interim guy, and you get a chance to see if you want to remove the interim tag and make him a long-term coach, or the GM or offensive coordinator, or whatever it happens to be. Think about this a little bit, of Daniel Jones having an interim backup quarterback tag, or interim veteran counterpoint to JJ McCarthy tag, I guess. It's a little clunky, but I think there's a little bit of that in the thought process here of, if you can get that start on it now and do a little bit of this get to know you period for the next 5-6 weeks, maybe longer, depending on how long they play, it kind of puts you in the driver's seat if, in fact, Daniel Jones is a backup next year, or a relatively affordable backup quasi starter. I really do think that if JJ McCarthy is healthy, he's going to get every opportunity to take that job and run with it next year. I have no reason to think that his health is an issue or anything is a long-term concern, but you do have to plan for contingencies. You can't just put all of your eggs in one basket with that position. So I think there's just this effort to say, let's take a flyer on this and see what happens.
Well, and to that point, I mean, they kind of skated by for a lot of years without much of a backup plan for Kirk Cousins. And part of that was because Cousins was remarkably durable until he wasn't. And then last year, they absolutely had to scramble. They showed, I know Mullins had a back issue, but you could tell there was not a absolute level of faith or trust in Nick Mullins last year, especially when they turned to Jaron Hall at various points, and of course Dobbs. So they started 4 quarterbacks last year. Is there scar tissue from that's making them maybe think about, if there's a chance to stockpile another quarterback just in case, and they're 9-2 this season, is there maybe some of that muscle memory from a time they've been burned recently by not maybe having the best backup plan?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that's true in the sense of Kevin O'Connell has an elephant's memory. Kevin O'Connell, and I don't know how much of this is something that it just kind of picks up by osmosis, but I think about this a lot with Kevin O'Connell. Like, his dad was running wiretapping on mafia dons in the FBI. Like,
Yeah.
you don't forget little details. You don't forget a face. You don't forget kind of things that have happened if you're in that type of a job. I would think. I have not been in that type of a job. So I don't know for sure, but I would imagine those would be traits that would serve you well in that type of a job. So if that's what you have grown up around, you probably have picked up a thing or two. And being an NFL coach, it behooves you to be able to remember things for a long time. I think a lot of the way they think about rookie quarterbacks is because of things that have happened to Kevin O'Connell in the past with Dwayne Haskins in Washington. He was around Johnny Manziel. This was not his rookie year, but when he was fairly early on. So I think there's a little bit of that in there. And yes, I do think last year when you go from Kirk Cousins, Nick Mullins is hurt, to Jaron Hall, to Josh Dobbs, to Nick Mullins, back to Jaron Hall, back to Nick Mullins, and Josh Dobbs is never to be seen or heard from again. I do think that there's some scar tissue there. I think there at least is the ability to say, if we can avoid this type of a scenario again, let's avoid it. Let's not put ourselves in that spot if there are cheap and relatively easily accessible ways to prevent that. So is Daniel Jones going to come in here and learn the offense to the point where if everybody gets hurt, that he's able to come in and save a playoff game in 6 weeks? I don't think I would expect that. I mean, he'll learn a lot. He'll pick up a lot of things, but I don't know that that's going to be something they want to do. But if you did end up in a situation where there's injuries and you have to go into a playoff game with a quarterback that you'd rather not have there, it doesn't hurt to plan ahead. I mean, the first playoff game I covered was Joe Webb. So Seen that too. I don't think that's the play here, but yeah, I think just to whatever degree you can prevent being caught in a bad quarterback spot, I think they're interested in doing that.
So I guess that leads perfectly to my next question. Like, would you envision Daniel Jones moving up to QB2 at some point, or is that subject to whatever happens once he gets in the building? Like, what do you think his role for this year is? Is it just sit and learn, absorb some stuff for 2 months, and we'll see what happens next? Or do you think that they like him enough that they would say, oh, he's picking stuff up pretty quick, like maybe he's your best QB2, even if you never have to use him?
I have a hard time seeing that he turns into that. I mean, I think Mullins, for all of his limitations, is a guy that has spent more time in this offense than anybody in this building. So there is still that level of comfort they have with him. And we saw it last week in Chicago. I mean, we haven't talked about it much because of how quickly Darnold was able to come back, but they were facing a 3rd and 13 when Darnold went out of the game. And that whole thing, as we saw, could have tipped very quickly we saw it tip at the end of the game. But if they don't convert that 3rd down, who knows where that goes if the Bears are able to get back in the game. Mullins comes in, and it was a catch and run to Aaron Jones, but he converts the 1st down. Aaron Jones gets a handoff for another 1st down, but you have somebody that can come in and run the offense that you're not sitting there saying, oh, we just have to kind of crawl into a shell. So I think Mullins is still the 2. I wouldn't expect that changes, but I think a lot of this is have him here. They'll get to see him practice. They'll get to see him, probably run some look teams, I would think. He's in meetings. He's going to have an opportunity to work with Josh McCown and Grant Udinski. All of those types of data points will be useful for them long term. I don't think there's going to be this huge expectation to put him in the mix this year. I think there's enough that they value about having time in this offense that they're not just going to go and say, well, that doesn't matter. We're going to throw him in quick. The risk of that is that he could, if he's on the practice squad, he could still go sign somewhere else. If there's a team that says, hey, we're really needy for a quarterback, we've got a spot on the active roster, you could go come in and play with us relatively quickly. I'm sure there's going to be that in the back of their minds, and it may be whispered to them by his camp. I wouldn't be stunned if that comes up at some point to say, hey, you need to put him on the active roster, otherwise you're going to risk losing him. That I suppose is a risk you take by going that way, but I don't really see him being QB2 right now. I think this is much more about, could he be QB2 or QB1 if McCarthy isn't ready for whatever reason next year. I think it's very much more about that.
Watch your dreams and savings grow with Royal Credit Union's 4.25% annual percentage yield 12-month certificate. Open now at any Royal office or online at rcu.org/certificate saver. Early withdrawal penalties could reduce earnings and principal. APY accurate as of 2/1/25. Insured by NCUA.
And there's plenty to like about him. Like, I think about his 2022 season, obviously, that got him the contract. They beat the Vikings in the playoffs. He has a very good game. He's not just, he's not just a passer. He ran for 700 yards that season. But even you go back, like, even as a rookie, when he started like 13 games, he had like 24 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Like, this isn't just 1 year, but the parallels between him and Darnold are very kind of eerie. Darnold was a top 10 pick in 2018, goes to New York, some success, but
they have shared MetLife Stadium and the back page of New York tabloids.
Yes, they have. And Jones is actually 1 week older than Sam Darnold. So they're, almost identical ages, like 27 right now. Obviously they both, the run of whatever they had in New York, the pressure, the bad situation, like there's a lot of parallels there, but they're not exactly the same quarterback. Like, as you've watched Jones over the years, like why do you think Kevin O'Connell is such a fan of his?
Well, I think he has been able to do a lot of things at the NFL level that are probably, I mean, his resume coming into this year was better than Sam Darnold's. I think he has probably been a little better caretaker of the ball, more so than Darnold was. I don't think he has the arm strength that Darnold does. Some of that stuff that Darnold brings you just in terms of the downfield passing, I don't think is quite the same with Daniel Jones, but his ability to command an offense, we saw a lot of that in really both of those games in 2022. That Christmas Eve game where the Vikings won, Daniel Jones was really good that day too. So he has shown that he can command an offense and get the ball where it needs to be. A lot of the rhythm and timing stuff that you hear O'Connell talk about, I think we have seen him do those things and operate in that type of an offense in the past. And he plays a little bit like McCarthy does in the sense of there will be some mobility with McCarthy too. So it's a little better fit in terms of if you want to build an offense that can translate to a backup quarterback beyond the starter. If the starter gets hurt, I think it makes some sense in that regard as well. He's a year removed from an ACL, so the mobility probably isn't quite what we saw in 2022. I would expect he'll get back to a little more of that, but I think there are some things where he overlaps skill set wise with McCarthy that makes some sense if you were to have these two guys be your quarterback room in 2025.
Final thought maybe here. It does seem like, if we go big picture with the Vikings and how they, moved on from Kirk Cousins this past offseason, went with Darnold and McCarthy, a much more affordable option. And of course, they've still got Cousins $28 million on this year's cap. They won't have that problem next year, but just this kind of philosophical shift, not so much of their own, but from the previous regime, where it's like, we're not going to pay the quarterback, at least until this quarterback is elite. We're not going to pay Kirk Cousins the long-term money, the $45 million that he got from Atlanta. We're going to bank on our ability to, bring in a guy to give us reasonable quarterback play. And you can certainly say they have been proven right so far this season. Darnold hasn't been perfect, but he's given them basically what Kirk Cousins had given them, and maybe arguably a little bit more, especially with those kind of big-time throws he makes. So is this just more evidence of the trend of where they're going with this, and maybe even some league-wide trends where a lot of these guys in the 10 to 14 range of starting quarterbacks just aren't going to get paid as much as they were before?
Well, what it reminds me of, the previous coach that played quarterbacks this way, Denny Green. I mean, the Vikings existed through a lot of the 1990s with these types of quarterbacks, guys that had success in other places, or maybe people thought were kind of after their prime. You can go from Jim McMahon to Warren Moon to, Brad Johnson in the middle there. Brad Johnson was their own pick, but a late pick. Randall Cunningham, Jeff George. They had a long run of, in fact, I think I wrote this at the beginning of the year, Darnold will be like the 6th or 7th quarterback in Vikings history to come in and start a playoff game in his first year for the team after being a veteran somewhere else. So they have had a pretty good run of those, and that's not by design. Obviously, they go eventually and draft Dante Culpepper and say, this is our long-term plant a flag until he gets hurt. And then you kind of have to reinvent yourself with the Gus Frerots and Brett Favre's and kind of go down the road from there. But I do think there is a little bit of a shift just in the sense that quarterbacks are getting to the point where they cost so much money. The number of guys saying $50 million of your cap, and then you're just tied to that, or if you make a mistake, you are tied to a lot of dead money. I think there is a little bit of a, well, okay, if there are opportunities to find some efficiency, to find some more affordable options, it makes some sense to look at it, just because signing a quarterback is more expensive than ever, and it does put you kind of in a corner more than it ever has financially. So if you have that guy, great. But I don't know that there are 12 of them in the world at any given time that are that guy. And if you're paying him like he is, it does make it very difficult. They have lived in that world, and that's not to say that they won't again. If McCarthy becomes the long-term solution at the position that they think is great, and they think he's a franchise guy, then you probably go forward with it. But moves like this that release some of these quarterbacks to the market, I do think is a reflection of people saying, you know what, this is really, really expensive to try to live with it if this guy isn't going to be at that level. And the other piece of it is when you draft one or you sign one, you are staking your reputation to that player. As a coach and a GM, you are saying, this is the guy that we think can take us to the promised land. And if you're wrong, people say, well, all right, you were wrong about that. Why should we give you another chance to go take another swing at it? Some GMs survive and get a second chance. Some get 5.
Rick Spielman.
It comes to mind. But most of the time, there is reputational capital staked on that position. So if you're not sure, I do think it makes some sense to say, let's give ourselves an exit ramp here, just to try to be able to pivot a little more quickly than signing a guy to a long-term contract would allow you to do.
It's the market efficiency of Kwesi meeting the quarterback whisperer of KOC, and pretty good results so far.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of that to it. I think there is a belief that there's a value above replacement quarterback developer in Kevin O'Connell. That's not a good acronym. It's like VORC-D or something. I don't know. Somebody's
run that by. Let's run that by him today. Let's see.
It's not great. I'll keep workshopping that, but I do think there's this belief of you're not counting Kevin O'Connell or Josh McCown or Wes Phillips or Grant Udinski or Chris O'Hara against your salary cap. So if you can get more out of these types of coaches that allow you to get more out of affordable quarterbacks, that is an efficiency. It's a competitive advantage, which is, competitive advantage is the holy grail of the NFL. So if you have it, use it.
Awesome, Ben. Great stuff. Look for this expanded topic in Ben's newsletter. Access Vikings newsletter comes out every Friday. Of course, coverage of Sunday's game against the Cardinals and more. Ben, appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mike.